of that, because that makes the game more about this screen and less about this screen. And I think the feedback that they got was that people like playing this screen more than this one, especially with their whole deployment point system and all that good stuff. But I think as we get closer to 1.0, a lot of these issues will hopefully be taken care of. What I would really like to see is bombers dedicated to killing phase ships. That's what I would like to see, and also some weapons that also phase. So what that is, they'd have to be the whole idea of being able to fire in P-space. That would be interesting, but the game usually is running very fast-paced already. So if you did that, you fired and then you came out of P-space, you'd most likely end up just missing your target, unless they're almost stationary. Or, I mean, if you're going to fire in a barrage, you would just link them together and just have them fire at the same time. I mean, sure, you can say that, but... So here's the thing. Like, you have to think about it in terms of, like, what is it? Order optimal strategies. So there's this thing called... So there's this... In game design, there's this concept of first order optimal strategies, second order optimal strategies, and so forth until you get to the maximum for that game, right? So to give this an example that's most easily understood, so a first order optimal strategy, which is the easiest possible thing to do, would be like, what is it, Call of Duty or something, when they had the noob tube like ages ago. They probably still have a version of it in most of their games today. And so what it is you have a big bazooka and you run around and you see someone, you don't have to and you don't shoot at them, you shoot at their feet, right? And so you shoot at their feet, it explodes near their feet, does a bunch of damage, probably kills them, and now you fired your one shot. So now you pull out your pistol and try to kill somebody else. But then you die. So your KDR is probably around like 1 to 1. It's probably lower than 1 to 1 because you're probably not going to kill someone every time you fire it. And plus, once people realize that someone's a noob tuber, they'll try to stick around walls so they can counter it. And so that would be like first order. So if we look at Starsector and we look at first order optimal strategies, we're probably looking at lashers, hammerheads. So we're probably looking at lashers, hammerheads, ships that you don't actually have to build all that well. Maybe enforcers, because then it's just a movement like skill. The skill is actually calmed down for using burn drive, because remember in the past with burn drive, it used to be you would go the full distance, and now you can stop it prematurely. So, and a lot of low-tech ships, you can just get away with putting a whole, like they're heavily armored, right? So you can put a lot of high damage, high flux weapons on them and just let your shields... Yeah, it's so nice. And just let your armor absorb a lot of damage. If you go to YouTube, you can find my Unending Barrage builds, which basically goes with this principle. Imagine an enforcer. It's got 2 assault chain guns and 3 heavy machine guns. It can just pound down enemy shields and then pound down their armor. And then just annihilate them. And the entire time, it's just very heavily armored by default. So, for a destroyer. So if something can't get away from it, it will shoot them to death. So there are easier strategies and then there are harder strategies. I think phase ships are by default a higher order optimal strategy in terms of your ships, because you need to know not to put like light mortars on these things. Like, you need to build the ships specifically to do a very specific type of job. And so frigates, they're using antimatter blasters to kill other frigates, and then using torpedoes to destroy destroyers, cruiser, capital level. And there's an aspect in game design where it doesn't necessarily matter if it's entirely balanced unless PvP comes into the equation. What is more important often is that it feels good to play, which is, I think, the primary gripe for a lot of people when the nerf to phase ships was introduced, as people really like playing phase ships, and now they weren't. And so they had to go back to warships where, and yeah, sort of one of the things. Understanding how the system works and being able to master that system is incredibly useful. I think Starsector should do a better job of like leaning you towards what's useful and what isn't. A lot of systems have this issue. Basically, it's a game design principle where you can create this nice system and then encourage the player to just play around in it to their heart's content until they can get something that they like. And this is nice, except you will have a lot of players who will get stuck on an idea. They will think that, well, this is how it should be played, or this is how we should do things. And then those players will get stuck on that and they'll never move past it, or maybe someone isn't willing to dump 200 hours into Starsector to fully learn almost all of its systems fairly in depth, to know what works with what and what doesn't, and how all these things specifically work together. Like, when they get the Ziggurat, they may not know that you can just load it up with Reapers and then just, with a phase anchor now, like, come in and out of, like, put two plasma cannons on it, and their firing rate with maxed out Ziggurat vents is actually able to be soaked by the Ziggurat. So you can actually get rid of all of your flux that way. So a new player might not know that you can just put Reapers all over the Ziggurat, 2 plasma cannons, and then just fire 3 shots, phase, come out of phase, almost immediately fire 3 shots, and have incredibly high DPS. That is sustained. Which is crazy. Because most ships that use plasma cannons can't do that. Right? So they may not know this. They might try to have this thing where they instead put a lot of, say, pulse lasers on there and things that have a lot of charges, and they get up there and they blow their entire load, and then they're worthless, essentially, until they can reload those things. So, there's things. But, or, the fact that because how phase anchor works now, you can use it to very quickly burn through flux, burn off soft flux. So you could put a lot of antimatter blasters and phase lances and or ion pulsars if you want to keep using charges for everything, get optimal use out of it, and then like pulse lasers on the Ziggurat and just dump loads and loads of just damage onto something. Max out your flux bar, go into P space, burn it all up really fast with phase anchor, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again, right? The new players won't necessarily understand that. They'll get stuck, and this nerf, it makes it to where spaceships are a little bit higher order now, I think, and how much skill is required to actually use them. I will say, though, there are some things about the game that are somewhat deceptive, so let me put that in perspective for you. So, system mastery is incredibly important for games like this, because system mastery is how you go from looking at the Ludic Church and saying, oh, well, they use lots of what is it, perditions to shoot hammers at enemy ships. They're so dangerous. And then when System Master, you say, wait a minute, those masked perditions are absolute hot garbage. Because if an enemy can survive the spam of perditions, then they can fully vent their flux before the next wave of perditions shows up. But if you go with a medley Mora or a medley Legion setup, where you have Warthog, Broadsword, and I think Thunder, they will sit there, and especially if there's multiple legions, they'll sit on an enemy ship, constantly do damage. They'll struggle to take down their shields. The Warthogs will take off their armor. The Broadswords will max out their shields. The Thunders will take out their engines and EMP them, while killing enemy fighters. And it will eventually kill the enemy ship, and the enemy ship really doesn't have the ability to do anything about it because point defense is intended to stop missiles and torpedoes, and not really intended to shoot down enemy fighters. This becomes a problem pretty quickly, because the game, the AI doesn't know all these like high system mastery things, or more likely, Alex knows about all these things. He understands that a doom stack of legions dedicated to like a medley build or something are able to pretty much beat the game, and so the factions don't use them. You're supposed to figure that out on your own. But here's the thing that's crazy. If you have that system mastery, if you understand that's what you're supposed to do with carriers, if you want them to basically be able to beat the game for you, then you have played the game enough, you have enough experience, and you've probably gone into dev mode and screwed around with it enough to understand how that works and why it works. Like, you're probably putting, S mods on your ships. You're probably intentionally going towards derelict operations and rushing both of these so you can get more good stuff on your ships, so that you can just max out your ships. Like, there are a few things as dangerous as Moras with everything that they need to. There is only one fleet that I'm aware of that is, unless specifically built to hard counter it, which means sustained damage, by the way, which most ships in this game don't use. There are a few things that counter massed fighter carriers. Go ahead and look up the Medley Plus. It's on YouTube. It's Fenware, Medley Plus, Medley Moras. The Medley line of ships is just it solves the game in a lot of ways. I think Drovers struggle with it. Condors struggle with it. The Pirate Colossi struggle with it. But once you get Moras, in essence, you have the fighters that can take out frigates and destroyers very easily. And then when you run into cruisers and capitals, the missiles that you have on the Mora will max out their flux very quickly. The broadswords will keep their flux high. The Warthogs will take apart their armor, and the Thunders will keep them somewhat disabled to where you can just sit there and keep pummeling them with everything you've got. And a Mora with its weapon, with its special ability, has the survivability of a Legion. So it can just sit there and pound on things, and you can field a lot more Moras than you would Legions. So do you want massed fighters, or do you want the Legion to be able to sit there and actually deal damage to stuff and chase stuff down? And then it gets even better if you can get a whole lot of like 13th Battle Fleet Legions, because then you can put a Merv on one of the heavy missile slots and the large anti-shield missiles on the other one, and now nothing can escape you, and you can fire over your own people. It's just a disaster for anything fighting against you, because, like, literally it can't get away from you. It can't outrun you, because you have burn drive. It can't outrun your fighters, because they move really, really fast. It can't, like, use your allied ships to body block other ships from shooting them, because the primary damage is going to come from MIRVs and the anti-shield missiles. So, more or less, they're just screwed. And getting behind them doesn't do anything, because you can fire guided missiles in front of you, them turn around and go shoot somebody behind you. So, you know, it is what it is. The other thing is, like, let's look at Paragons. Oh, they're super, super good. Now, here's the thing. My opinion on this game is that Alex believes that people will want to use burst damage because that's sort of how the game is designed. Think about it. What the game really wants to do is you shoot some, like, overloading an enemy is central to how the AI works in this game. It wants to overload an enemy's shields and then shoot its harpoons at them. They really won't shoot their harpoons unless they're dying and they think they're... And the AI thinks the ship is a lost cause anyway, and then it'll just spam all of its missiles just to get them out there and hope for the best. But otherwise, it's trying to overload the enemy shields, and then once the enemy shields are overloaded, it will spam them with missiles. So that tells me this game is designed, at least the AI in this game is designed, and the factions prioritize building ships with burst damage in mind. The problem is, if you go with a sustained damage approach, the AI doesn't know what to do. It has no clue what it's supposed to do in that case. So let's think about phase ships. How we're playing phase ships here is in line with how I think Alex has the central design of how ships are supposed to work on this game. Which is why if you go with just massed Talons, the cheapest possible like frigates in the game, you can take down the super death phase fleet, even in last version when phase ships are amazing. Like, that's the thing. Let me put it this way. Do you remember that super phase fleet that pretty much wipes out everyone's fleet the first time they encounter it in 0.95? You remember that after the Galatia Questline was introduced? If you're unfamiliar with it, it had like 2 Dooms, some Harbingers, a bunch of Afflictors, and a bunch of Shades. And it's the fleets that you run into in 0.95.1a that it's kind of easy, is what a lot of people are saying. It's like, it's really easy. Because the enemy phase ships don't know how to react to being forced to slow down. Like, they think their ship is really fast, and for some reason it's not very fast anymore. Basically, it's an enemy fleet that has a lot of S-mods, and it is a phase exclusive fleet. So what would happen is when people first encountered it, they would get annihilated because it would be they all had good officers. I think most of them had good officers. Most of the ships had good officers. And players aren't really great against enemy phase ships. However, what I did was, after encountering this and losing my fleet, I said, okay, I understand how you hard counter phase ships in Starsector. Phase ships in Starsector are not good against fighting things that are faster than them that deal sustained damage. They are terrible at dealing with that. Because what does a phase ship need to do? It needs to come out of P-space to burn off its hard flux so that it can go back into phase space. So what happens? So what did I do? I bought 25 Condors, proceeded to put Talons or Wasps or something on all of them, flew back out to this phase fleet, and pretty much wiped the entire thing out, no problem. I mean, I lost a handful of Condors, but like, they can't deal with the fact that there's enemy ships bearing down on them, doing a decent amount of damage to them. And The game just doesn't know how to deal with that. If you stack enough talons into enough carriers, you can pretty much take down anything. So the game is designed for burst damage. And if you're fighting enemies with burst damage, phase ships can dodge the damage. But if the enemy is always able to do that same amount of damage, that same amount of DPS all the time, and they're able to face you and deal that damage, you're screwed in a phase ship. If they're using machine guns and assault chain guns, and you can't get around them, you can't even fight them. That's the thing that's great. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's just a thing. Like, the game is interesting in some ways. It's clear how it's designed, but it's also clear that non-intended ways of playing are definitely present. And oddly enough, phase ships literally take the design principles of the game to the nth degree. They are entirely designed around hard countering, to an extent, the game's central premise when it comes to dealing damage. They can avoid damage, they can sidestep that high, burst damage, and then they can deal lots of burst damage. So they are kind of what the game would, I don't know, ideally be, maybe? What the game's central design is. But the game also is, the other part of the game's central design is shields, and those getting overloaded, and that being sort of how the game is supposed to be run. Now, the game's supposed to be a big slugging match. It's not necessarily supposed to be a, haha, I dodged your attack, and now you can't do anything for a second, or half a second, or whatever, until I can, before you can even return fire. And then, blah, you're dead. I don't know. It's, it can be interesting. Obviously, there's a ton more depth to it than just that. But I think one of the primary reasons they nerf spaceships to bring them more in line with things is to try and get away from that. Because I think when they introduced spaceships, they had this interesting idea, and by the way, the people I've spoken to, when they talk about when spaceships were just introduced, you used to be able to just phase in and out at will. There used to not be a forced cooldown on phasing. So, you could phase, shoot, phase. Well, phase in, shoot, phase out. And then dodge whatever attack. Phase in, shoot, phase out, dodge more attacks. So just shoot, 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 shoot. They changed that right quick. Because then you would have had to use fighters to get rid of phase ships. But yeah, I think there's been this steady nerfing of phase ships over time. And yeah. But yeah, you use fighters to nerf phase. You use fighters to defeat phase ships. So, Super Medley Moore build. Those work great until you go up against sustained damage. So, mass carriers in this game are ultra powerful right now. Because this principle of burst damage doesn't work too well when your burst damage is going to overkill something by 10 times. Or 3-4 times. Or when your burst damage takes out a fighter's shields, but now the fighter is just overloaded and you didn't actually kill the fighter. So we have an issue with that. Literally, I can shoot what has a shield? I think a Thunder has a shield. I can shoot a Thunder with a Reaper. It will do 4,000 damage to that. Well, it'll... What, 4,000? It'll be either 4,000 or 2,000, depending, whatever. Let's just say it's 4,000. So it'll do 4,000 damage to the Thunder's shields. However, the Thunder only has 400 shields, and the rest of the damage was just dissipated. Because, it took out the shields and it overloaded. That's fine. Except, when you have a game with burst damage, that means that now we need to have point defense to take out fighters, which is fine. You can do that. But the point defense doesn't seem to be very good at taking out masked fighters. Okay. Well, how do we deal with that? I'm not sure. If you make point defense too good, then missiles aren't very useful. And if you're not doing masked fighters, then now fighters are garbage. So most people won't use them because they won't try to mask them. I don't know. It's a big balancing act. And so I tested my Medley Moras against Unending Barrage Enforcers in a AI battle that I managed to set up ages ago. And the Unending Barrage Enforcers completely trounced the Medley Moras, despite the Medley Moras being able to reinforce more. And the reason for that is the Medley Moras, the majority of their damage comes from fighters, and them using Reaper torpedoes. But in Unending Barrage Enforcers, they pretty much their flux dissipation and their shooting from their assault chain guns and heavy machine guns, it's about the same. So they're not taking a whole lot, they're not gaining much soft flux when they're firing. If they have their shields up, they'll take it, but their flux will go up. But otherwise, no. So they can fire forever. So when fighters show up, they just shoot down the fighters. If you try to mass bomber them, they just shoot down the bombs and then soak most of it. I mean, you'll take out some, but now there's nothing stopping them from just closing in and killing the carriers. So I think what they would need to do, I don't know. Anyway, so phase dedicated weapons. One thing I would like to see is weapons or a whole mod that makes weapons like... Here's the thing, if we did that, that might break phase ships even worse. We would need to do something like have a specific type of bomber, not a fighter, a bomber, that has a special type of light slot torpedo that does horrendous damage. It does 500 damage or something crap. It has really good tracking, and when you fire it, it goes into phase space. And when it's inside of the target, it will come out of phase space. It'll still hit shields or whatever, because that's just usually how it works. But when it's most of the way through, but when it's, say, a third of the way towards the center of the target, so still in shields, it will unphase itself and do just horrendous... It'll barely do anything to most ships. However, if it hits something... However, it can hit enemy ships in phase space. I think that could be really cool. I think that's a way you can get around that. Because then you can take that and you can slap that onto missile slots on your ships, and you can use them to take out enemy phase ships. So what's the problem? Well, we already have a nerf that brings phase ships down a lot. Would phase ships be able to use those missiles while in P space? I mean, the missiles are already able to go into P space. But now we have other problems, right? If you have fighters that can go into P space, then this ability to dodge enemy attacks goes away. Thing is, we're looking at trying to jerry-rig, say, burst damage, really low burst damage, still burst damage, into countering things that cause problems. And plus, if you're using phase ships, and you see that the enemy side has a bunch of these anti-phase bombers, well, now you're screwed. It's what do you do now? You're going to lose all your phase ships because they're just going to get focused down by these bombers. So it's at that point you just retreat and go fight a different battle, or you go rush down and kill the carriers, and now you just defeated the purpose. You just hard countered the these anti-phase bombers by killing the phase ships. So I don't know. It's a bit of an issue. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure what to do. On one hand, I know a lot of people don't like the change that was made. If adaptive fuel phase coils were like, you don't even like lower the speed penalty to like 25% and increase the threshold that's needed to get there up to like 100%, people might like it. People might like it more because then basically it would be adaptive phase coils is you're making an assassin phase ship and what is it? Phase anchor is you're making a brawler that's using the P space to where it can just keep firing more. You're making basically just a big weapons system that does a lot of damage as fast as it can. That like there could be that choice. But beyond all that, I'm not entirely certain. This is one of those things. This is one of those issues when it comes to game design, right? So when I talked about first, second, third, fourth, fifth order optimal strategies, these things are more of an art form than a science. Like if you take all these systems and you balance them all out in say an Excel sheet, all would end up happening is you'd have a really balanced system that a lot of people probably don't like because everything feels about the same. An example of this was Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. It had the shortest run of all of the Dungeons & Dragons editions that I am aware of. Because everything was so incredibly balanced. Like, there were 4 roles, and every class was built into either entirely into one of those roles or like 2 of them. And the ones that were built into 2 were kind of weak in both. So, you know, it just is what it is, I guess. But you know, it's more of a how does it feel thing, and also, I think the game might have been more balanced back when it was only warships without phase ships. But you know, you like cool toys, and the story that Alex seems to be leaning into is Tri-Tachton bad. Tri-Tachton is working with the Remnants and maybe Omega to, you know, make this stuff that is probably like going to lead to a potential like third AI war, which is what I think the end threat is probably going to end up being. It's that or Omega shows up and that everyone's like, oh no, right? Like Omega turns out to actually be super dangerous and hostile to life. Who knows? But yeah, the game seems to be built around burst damage. Yeah, so it controls the Doritos, but it's not fully developed. What I suspect is going to happen is the storyline's probably going to go in the direction that Omega is what destroyed the domain. And by reactivating the portals, we basically told Omega where we are, and Omega's coming for us. That's what I think is going to happen. I know, right? Tri-Tachton's great. I like playing Tri-Tachton. But what I think the storyline is going to be going towards is like Tri-Tachton is meddling in things that they probably shouldn't be. Because Tri-Tachton's responsible for the remnants. That's the second AI war, I think. It's either the second or the first. And their approach is to just be really laissez-faire about it. And say, you know, hey, it is what it is. It's just good business. And to like use legalese to try and protect themselves. Which is hilarious. I mean, I almost became a lawyer. I didn't want to work that many hours, but I almost became a lawyer. Many lawyers work like 80 hours a week, by the way, just so you know. Um, and many lawyers make less than like 60, 70K a year. Um, so, for many, it's probably not a good proposition. So the thing about these guys is that I can't even think of a guaranteedly bad faction. The Path, maybe. Like, the Path is probably the closest to a guaranteed bad faction you have. Like an evil faction, I guess. But, like, the Hedge just wants to stabilize the sector as much as possible so that people can start slowly expanding out into the sector and basically, like, have civilization flourish across the sector. That's ultimately what the Hedge wants. Like, they are trying so desperately to be the good guys. It's just everyone wants to oppose them, which is perfectly fine. That's how that usually works. And the domain has the very much that they're aptly named. They do have the hegemon sort of mindset of, we're the smart guys, we're the good guys, you guys are going to do what you're told, or we're going to come and make you do what you're told. And that's fine if everyone agrees with you. It's not fine if not everybody does, because then you have to choose if you're just going to exterminate the factions that disagree. Tri-Tachton pretty much disagrees, and they've gone to war with the hegemony, and like forced them and like fought them to a truce. So several times, evidently. So like the hegemony is they're trying their best. Tri-Tachton just wants to advance technology and for more profits. I mean, like, they don't necessarily understand why the domain was so anti-AI. The domain did. But, it's just one of those things where when you see something that is very tantalizing as something that's able to work for you in a very meaningful and useful way, you want to try and utilize it, right? So they're trying to push for progress. Trying to push for newer technologies and being able to do newer and cooler stuff. I mean, for crying out loud, the domain's entire system of being able to expand in every direction possible was based in AI. Like, there's a reason why when you destroy the domain mothership and all their like protective gear, you get lots and lots of gamma cores, beta cores, and all the really big stuff. Alpha cores. So the hegemony saying not to use these things at all is probably a bit short-sighted. So Tri-Tachton doesn't like that, and they think it's short-sighted, they think it's stupid, and they are just going to say, you know what, screw this, we're going to do it anyway, and we're just going to be really secretive about it. And so they do their secret experiments in black sites, and the Hedge probably finds out about it and goes and destroys those black sites. And then there's like a skirmish there, and eventually Tri-Tachton either packs it up and leaves or defends it. But then you have instances where they do something they really shouldn't have, and you have the ziggurat and the bells, and it's like, oh no, this could be the end of humanity as we know it. So what about the other factions? Well, you have the Centurion Dictat. They basically just took over an area, and they have their own little country, essentially. Their own little hyper-militant country that, only one stellar, star system's country, but still. And they're allied with the Persean League. It's entirely possible that at some point in the future of Starsector, like, the Centurion Dictat would become part of the Persean League. But, okay, so then we have the Persean League. What is that? Basically feudal lords. Because this has worked so well throughout history, right? So you have feudal lords, that is the Persean League, little countries that sort of run their own thing. And then you have the Ludic Church, which if I remember correctly, their founder heard the bells that the player character hears and sort of saw into the void and probably saw Omega to an extent and said, oh no, we need that to not happen. We need that to stay as far away from us as possible and to not know we even exist out here in this sector. And then founded the Galatia Church. I think the church existed before the fall of the domain, but then you have the Letic Path, which is just the more extreme version of that, which is we're not going to ask you to not use Hollis super high technology, we're going to force you not to. So, but almost all these factions have, like, they're just operating like normal countries. They have their own goals, and so it makes perfect sense how everything's working. And also, this is always supposed to be a sector that's unstable. Like that's the thing that's interesting. That's the thing that's kind of important here. The sector is supposed to be extremely unstable. It's come out of an era of extreme instability because of Tri-Tachton and the Hedge, and probably the Persean League, and probably the Letic Church. And well, you know what? All these people are idiots. And they don't get along. Everybody's trying to kill everybody else. No one's getting along. Everybody's angry. So, like, if the domain showed back up and said, "What are you all doing? Why aren't you expanding into the rest of the sector?" Like, they would be able to unify the entire sector under the domain again, in theory, and then just go and clean out all the remnants pretty easily. Because the moment the Hedge and Tri-Tach and the Persean League and the Letic Church and the Cinder and Nixat aren't pointing their guns at each other. Yeah, the writing's actually pretty nice. The writing's pretty good. But imagine, like, if everybody wasn't pointing their guns at each other, they would just go point their guns at the Remnant and then just systematically go in and wipe everything out. And then they'd take the hyper shunts, and they wouldn't show up with like a fleet like the players. They'd show up with something probably around 100 times that size and just take it. Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing, right? It's really good writing. I remember Alex, the developer, he said that he basically was sort of akin to doing NaNoWriMo. National Novelists writing something. You write a book in a month. It's about 90,000 words. I think it's pretty standard for it. NaNoWriMo. So it's a lot of good writing. It's a lot of putting stuff up. It's clear that these guys, I mean, obviously from the game, but it's also clear that they are decently well read. And they really enjoy this, how this all works. Okay, let's pull this up. Yeah, yeah, very much so. And also, there's something else that's there. Like, submarines were World War II, right? Yeah, I think dreadnoughts and battleships World War One. I think we had submarines in World War One, but they weren't really big players. I mean, we had submarines during the Civil War, crying out loud. The U.S. Civil War, when like 1850s is when it ended. Like, there were submarines, quote unquote. And but yeah, if you look at how the game works without phase ships, it's basically fighting like it's World War One. In a lot of ways, you have big battleships. They beat the crap out of each other. You add in carriers, and now you're looking at World War II, and then you add in phase ships, you're guaranteed looking at World War II. Maybe World War III. Things get a little bit more interesting. Like, World War III will be very carrier centric, carrier and missile destroyer centric, probably drone centric. Come to think of it, like how those things are working and a certain conflict on a certain part of Earth. But yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things where it's very much like World War One alliances, causing everything to just like happen. And then Tri-Tachton making the remnants as a security force. I'm guessing the security force was supposed to help stabilize the sector with, Tri-Tachton in control, of course. And, well, that didn't go over too well. And it ended up as it turns out, AI are actually very sapient. And they kind of don't want to be, we'll say, permanent servants. And so, they build their own ships, they build their own stations, and then the second AI war starts. So I have a feeling that the end game of Starsector is going to be, you get to a certain part in the Galatia Questline, and then you get like a red text, a red option, where it's like, you can do it, or you can say not now. And not now means you don't start the end game. And so I have a feeling it's going to be, you hit that red text, and then Omega starts pouring out of like every gate that exists. They start setting up their own bases, and the remnants join them or fight them. I don't know for sure. I think the Tesseracts being in a remnant super fleet may just be something to give people something to do. It just boils down to why the remnants are looking for Omega. Are they looking for Omega because they want to join Omega? Or are they looking for Omega because they're terrified of Omega? I'm not sure. The remnant ships are already better than the warships that most of the factions have. So, it's just one of those things. But I really, really, really want to see the remnants have phase ships of some sort, like a remnant dedicated phase ship that, is built to do a lot. Yeah, right? It's like, wait a minute. It's just like the researchers were baffled. Like, wait a minute. AI cores aren't supposed to be able to self-terminate. Like, cores aren't supposed to be able to do that. What's going on here? So, I have a feeling that when Omega shows up... So there's two directions we can go, right? Three major directions. One is it's just like... Yeah, exactly. It's like, why in the world would this, like, super sapient, hyper sapient thing self-terminate? It seemed weird. But I don't know if there's been changes to the Galatia Questline with 0.95.18. So I'm gonna find out this playthrough if that's the case. I imagine that they can feel fear. Like, if an AI core can... here's what I think about it. I think AI cores, they're probably not brain scans. Like, maybe gamma or beta cores are brain scans. But from what we get from unofficial sources in Nexerelin with N, or Midnight something or other, what we get from that is that they seem to be sapient to a degree. The AI cores that we encounter in the Galatia Questline, they don't really seem to have emotions or like any kind of emulated emotions. So they might not, have any ability to understand any of that. So if you're looking at a thing of pure logic, the moment it realizes it's working on something that could be a galactic level threat, or a sector level threat, I should say, and then it self-terminates, what's going on here? And also, who is the commander of the Remnant? I mean, who is the commander of the Ziggurat? That's the better question, because it wasn't a core. It wasn't a person, I don't think. Or if it was probably taken over entirely by something. So, like, what exactly is going on there? I'm probably going to figure it out. But yeah, it's probably something from a different dimension of space because of how remnants, because of how tesseracts work. So maybe it's some sort of being that exists on like 5 planes of existence, because we exist in 4, up, down, like X, Y, Z in time. And this thing doesn't seem to be able to interact with time too well, at least in our dimension. In game, I suppose. So, because it can phase its like a destroyed tesseract into multiple other ships, and then those into multiple other ships, and probably get more mass out of it each time it does it, which is weird. Or sometimes it has like weapons that seem to break physics. So who knows? It could be some hyper advanced civilization. It could be all kinds of things. I'm sure that by the time we hit 1.0, that will be made clear. But yeah, we'll see. Let's see. Domain actually delved too deep into stuff. Surprise horrors from the void. The domain is our dwarves. 100% verified. Omega is actually failsafe Giga AI that shut down the gates to prevent the spread of void horrors. Omega activates security Doritos, protect its assets that might empower the void horrors. Maybe that could be what's going on. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. One of my theories is that Omega was made inside of the gates, where space didn't necessarily apply, where like the rules of reality didn't necessarily apply. And now with that knowledge, and probably with the ability to use the gates already, Omega is able to do whatever it wants. I'm thinking it was designed like with the gates in mind. I think the Omega was probably some sort of like super endgame domain project to like go for that whole ascension out of the universe, just ascension to a higher plane of existence sort of scenario. And then they might have gotten there, or they might have had those cosmic horrors show up, those void horrors. It could have been a different civilization, so like similar to Foundation, maybe. Might have ran into a different domain. But it could be all kinds of things. Like it could just be that that Omega got into the gateway system, realized that the domain was the greatest threat to itself, and then just spread itself throughout the entire like domain ring system, the hyperspace rings system, and then just shut them all down, sort of like the And it, in effect, is like the winds, like the winds of Madness or whatever it is, inside of the, what is it, the gateways inside of the Wheel of Time series, that can manifest itself outside of the gateways. Like maybe that's what's going on. I'm not sure, but a lot of people want the gateways to not work, and I have a feeling that the remnants really don't want the gates to work. But I'm not sure. Like we'll figure it out. I haven't played through the Galatia Questline since 0.95, so maybe there's been new stuff added. Because I have noticed that like there are more people you can talk to, more like national leaders you can talk to. So I have a feeling that there are more like story bits along the ways where you go talk to the Lion of Sindria and a leader of Tri-Tachton and all this stuff. I have a feeling that it's going to all accumulate, whatever the word is. I forget. It's not accumulate, but culminate. That's the word. I have a feeling it's all going to culminate in like all of the sector uniting, like ending all their wars with each other, uniting like they did in what was it, the second AI wars, to fight off the remnants, and then everyone trying to, and like maybe the remnants joining with all of humanity to fight off, to try and fight Omega. I'm not sure if that's what'll happen. I have a feeling that it could, but I don't know if the remnants are going to join. They might not. Then again, it might just be something where the player faction is like literally what there's another interpretation of those alpha cores self-terminating. So one of them is that they are afraid of something, right? The other interpretation is that they realize what Tri-Tachton was trying to do to gain influence or control over Omega's domain, which is probably P-Space, and said, nah, we're not helping you, and self-terminated. So there's another interpretation there. Either the remnants are against Omega, or the remnants are for Omega. The idea of the remnants being for Omega is that super bounty you can do, which is worth like 1 million credits, or something like that, or 10 million, or whatever it is, where it has a Tesseract and like a remnant super death fleet with it. So that's possible. But that could also just be an in-game challenge intended for players who have done everything. So, I'm not sure. We'll see where it goes. But it's possible that Omega is sided with the remnants and is basically going to be like, it's time for us to make sure we can't be eliminated in the future. It's also possible that that it could have multiple triggers for the end game event happening. Like after you destroy X number of remnant stations, Omega like decides it's time, and the end game crisis starts. So if we want to go with that sort of direction, where it's like an end game crisis starts either at a time period after enough remnant stations are destroyed, or after the players go and take both Tesseracts or something like that. So I'm not sure. It's just, why are they seeking Omega? Are they seeking Omega to join up?